So thanks everyone for joining the call of RRP Party. So here we're going to discuss about how economic empowerment of women will fuel the next wave of India's growth. Hashtag Nari Shakti. So we all know that the biggest issue hampering India's growth is corruption, right? So because the corruption is so endemic in India, that the GDP growth and other business initiatives are getting hampered. That's a known fact if you speak with any of the Indian citizens, right? And then a lot of surveys prove that is the issue. Okay, so let's look into a little bit into corruption and the structure of how it works, right? So we've seen news items like the bridges collapsing right after, they're basically created like once the bridges are there, um, they get collapsed after 15 days of construction. This happens. The road quality construction is very bad. Everything goes, the given life would be 2 years, but in 3 months the roads turn bad again, right? This is the cycle of corruption. Now every aspect of Indian government system, like whether it's PDS, whether it's roads, etc., there is corruption. All right. Sir, can you on mute?
Just a minute.
Okay. So, Indian government spends a lot of money on infrastructure projects, right? And and then I want the biggest reason why they do that is it not only enables the corruption engine, but it also gives a great foot up for the newspapers and etc. This is one of the big reasons why Indian politicians love to spend a lot of money on mega infrastructure projects. Now, as you know, with every infrastructure project, there is obviously a complexity involved in it, and at every stage of the project, there is a chance for corruption, whether it's right from beginning of the project, allotment and materials, decisions, etc., etc. So everywhere there is a chance for corruption, and people take advantage of the system, right? Now, like we discussed previously, the governments and politicians, the corrupt politicians favor these big projects, which are frankly, a lot of them are not necessary for a country like India, whose GDP per capita is about $2,000, right? So the reason why they do that is because there is a kickbacks that the politicians get. Apart from the projects, they also spend a lot of money on uh, public servants, putting up, creating unnecessary posts, all of that, primarily because it's a corruption cycle. So they get money from giving jobs to people, public sector jobs, right? That's how it works. And all of this causes a lot of cost to the taxpayers. Okay. Now, if you go and talk to any corrupt official, I mean, privately, obviously, what they would say is, hey, we have to, it's not just the money, it's not just for us, it's also somebody, to my manager, to my boss, right? So they say that they have to give the money to their boss, and their boss has to give the money to their boss, right? And usually it ends up, almost always it ends up with a politician like an MLA or an MP. Okay. Now, if you go and talk to them privately again, the reason why the MLAs and MPs are so corrupt is because come election time, they have to spend crores of money on election freebies, right? So they have to basically give out this cash for the voting public. This doesn't happen in the cities, so it's not covered as much in the news, but it does happen quite often in the villages. So if you go to a village during an election time, and they call it election festival, during that 1 week of election, politicians give massive benefits like cash, like alcohol, biryani, saris for women, etc., etc., so as to tempt the voters. Basically, it's called cash for vote. This is actually an illegal practice, but it happens across almost all the villages in India, right? And then the logic is the politicians have to spend this money so as to woo the voters, right? And they get the vote back and all that. Now, once they get the vote back, the politicians recoups the money by engaging in corruption. This is the corruption cycle that happens in India, and this is basically hampering India's growth as we all know it. Okay. Apart from exploiting the cash for vote, politicians also engage in various caste and religion-based divisions so as to sort of look as if they're benefiting one party, one group of people over other people, right? And this is the kind of division politics we all see in Indian politics for quite some time now. Now, as a result of all of this, the result is that Indian business-friendly climate is pretty low. So if you see the numbers, this is a slightly old number. It's 2021 or something, but the numbers are still pretty bad. So 63rd in business friendliness and 120th in contract enforcement. So the key ingredient for a successful business is obviously contract enforcement, and that there India is lacking massively, right? So the contract enforcement is pretty bad in India. Now you might wonder, hey, don't don't the politicians know that? Why can't they fix this contract enforcement or make the country business friendly? Now, the thing is, the reason they don't want to do this is because if they fix this issue, if they fix the contract enforcement, if they make the country business friendly and remove that red tape and license laws, etc., what is going to happen is their ability to collect the bribes is going to come down significantly, right? So a typical MP or MLA who spent 20 crores or 30 crores winning an election, if they roll back this red tape, what is going to happen is their ability to collect the bribes will come down, which means they'll not be able to recoup the money they have spent during elections. So they don't want to do it. So they have an incentive not to do it, right? So this is obviously, these are all well-known issues that everyone in India discusses, but the issue is how do we fix that? Okay, so what is the solution to fix this corruption behemoth and also improve the business climate? Now at RRP Party, we are proposing few solutions. These are not perfect, but these are our observations from watching other democracies across the world, right? Now, what we are proposing is basically a direct benefit transfer for women, elderly, and other weaker sections via Aadhaar linked bank accounts. So, what we are again repeating, so direct benefit transfer for women, elderly, and other weaker sections via Aadhaar linked bank accounts. Now, women empowerment is a great buzzword. So every politician talks about it. They talk about empowering women. We've seen that the inequality in India, and especially women face incredible inequality in India because they don't get any financial assistance uh, for different reasons, right? I mean, India being a largely agricultural economy and labor-driven economy, women have a natural disadvantage there. Now they do roll out some women-centric policies like gas cylinders or what or not, and some subsidies, but it's on and off. It happens once in a while, etc. Right? Now, the reason why we believe that the direct benefit transfer should be focused on women instead of everyone is that women uh, framing policies that appeal to women would have higher electoral gains, right? Because women form over 50% of vote share in India, and any policy that does not give you an electoral gain, whether it's a good policy or a bad policy, is actually useless policy because it's not going to help you in election. So if we are thinking about changing something on the ground, we have to think of electoral gains. That's a very important point, right? Now, now the issue is, even though politicians think and come up with a lot of uh, policies focused towards women and children, at the end of the day, what happens is because the country is so diverse and so large, these policies fail to address the diverse needs of the country's citizens, right? Because there's so many different states, so many different languages, and all of that. And at the end of the day, the enforcement at ground level is obviously very difficult because, like we discussed previously, there's multiple chains involved, and there is a possibility of corruption at every level. And if the proof is in the pudding. If you walk into any of the government schools in India, in any of the villages or even cities, right, their quality is pretty bad compared to a typical private school, right? And this is a hard hitting fact of Indian life, Indian village life, right? Now, despite the country spending significant amounts of education, this still is going on even after 70 years of independence. That's what they say. Now, what we are proposing is we are proposing that the government should at least transfer 3,000 rupees per month to every female voter and an additional 2,000 rupees per child, right, up to 2 kids, using the Aadhaar-based direct benefit transfer. So instead of spending this insane amounts on different schemes, cut them down and basically do a direct benefit transfer. The advantage of direct benefit transfer is there's no middleman involved. So the government sends the money, the recipient gets the money instantly, right? So there's no middleman involved. There's no chain of middlemen involved rather. So the people get it instantly or near instantly. Now, the interesting effect, the beauty of this Aadhaar-based DBT is it is one of the least corruption-prone welfare schemes by a wide margin. So if you look at any of the government policies, they're all filled with corruption, except for this one, because it's an Aadhaar-based bank-linked project wherein the potential for corruption or leakage is extremely low. Okay. In fact, studies show that the amount of fraud that happens with Aadhaar is less than 0.01%, which is an incredible amount of accuracy. Okay, what are the benefits of using Aadhaar, right? So if you're not from India, then Aadhaar is this identity program that has been launched by Government of India in 2008, and it is a biometric. It links one's identity with biometric aspects like fingerprints, iris, and other aspects, right? So it comes with a unique identification number, a 12-digit number, and it is basically linked to an individual whenever they register at the government office. Now, the advantage is you can do direct benefit transfer, you can do identity authentication. So, for example, KYC. After rolling out of Aadhaar, the financial inclusion in India has grown significantly because the friction is removed. And now, what we are saying is instead of having like hundreds of different programs, if we can cut some of them and then do direct benefit transfer, there is no possibility of fake identities because Aadhaar removes that. There's no possibility of duplicate identities. And then you'll be able to target your end user or customer very effectively because you have all this biometric data of their age, sex, and region, all of that. And then it also, as a result, at the end of the day, reduces fraud as a result, right? And then because it's a purely digital program, you have a real-time monitoring as well. Now, the direct benefit transfer is not a new thing. It has already seen electoral success in states like MP and West Bengal, where women already get 1,000 rupees. So it's not something that is we are coming out of blue. But what we are saying is this is a very successful program in these states, and we need to replicate its success across the country on every state and even at the center, right, at a federal level. Okay. Now, the similar benefits or direct benefit transfer, cash transfers are already there in developed countries like UK and other Scandinavian countries, which actually fuel the consumer economy. More on this we'll talk later, but it's already there. It's not a new thing that you have to break your brain on. It's already there. Now, once women receive 3,000 rupees, like we discussed, what happens is in the first election cycle, people get this, women get this. In the second term, whatever, it will not be possible to take this off. So it gives that push for politicians to actually increase it rather than decrease it. Right? That's a wonderful effect as well. Which at the end of the day, what happens is when women do get this money, they're going to spend it because they have this urgent need of taking care of their kids, families, etc., etc. So which means they are going to spend that money immediately on whatever they choose to, and that creates a cyclical economy, right? And eventually it actually ends up boosting government tax revenues. Studies show almost 80% of the money the government gets back eventually in 2 to 3 years once they do such cash benefit transfer programs. Now, there are obviously doubts. People draw parallels to Venezuela or Zimbabwe and say these countries also have launched massive welfare programs and they have collapsed, right? No, that is a false propaganda. The reality is Venezuela and Zimbabwe have not collapsed because of welfare programs. Welfare programs are widely available in Europe and North America, etc. The rich world, so-called rich world, even in China. So they're there. The economies haven't collapsed. The reason why Venezuela and Zimbabwe have collapsed is primarily because they're some of the toughest places to do businesses, and governments has appropriated private businesses. So they impose crushing regulation on businesses, and they've destroyed the currency, further weakening the country's economy. So the reason is government intervention in free market, not the welfare per se, right? So now, if you look at a country like UK, where I've spent significant time, and I understood this after being here, and looking at their welfare schemes, etc. The government actually spends almost 70% on social welfare, whether it is pensions, direct cash benefit for the economically unprivileged, deprived areas, etc. If you look at this pie chart, right, you can see that almost 70% is already spent on public welfare and very little on other things, where the Indian government spends a lot. So that's the irony there. Okay. Now, coming back to Indian government budget, this is a number for 2024. So if you look at this, they are spending quite a bit on defense. The next big item is rural development. But if you go down the chain, they're spending quite a bit on IT and energy, whatever, transport. All of that is to prop up failing public sector undertaking companies like BSNL and railways and all that. So even though the country is a poor country, it behaves as if it's got this insane amount of cash, right? So it's diverted all of these resources towards economically unsound area things like bailing out farmers and giving massive fertilizer subsidies, even though India is already producing uh, grains that are twice as much as the population. They're still giving this fertilizer subsidies because that's an election issue, right? So we need to change away from this model of electoral freebies and just focus on helping the poorest of the poor and bridging that inequality. Now, this is a more bigger, clearer picture of the government's budget in 2021. As you can see, very little of it is actually direct benefit transfer or social welfare. A whole part of it is goes to different industries and different plans like smart cities, mega projects like highways and ports, and propping up railways, bullet trains, whatnot. So a lot of this is basically big infrastructure spending rather than direct benefit transfers and welfare programs that affect the poorest of the poor. Okay, that's the issue with Indian finance government funding. Now, the what UK can learn from India is basically a digital ID like Aadhaar actually can cut down the benefit fraud. UK routinely suffers from benefit fraud, so we believe that if the UK government rolls out something like a digital ID Aadhaar scheme, they could actually cut down on benefit fraud and even plug that gap further. I think this is a little bit of learning from India. Now, there is obviously the question of if the government doesn't build the roads, who will build the roads, right? So because that's an nagging question we all have. The reality is, a lot of these projects are already built with public-private partnerships. So if you look at the big highways, they are usually built by a private player and a public player, government acting as some sort of guarantor or backing the project. But ultimately, a good chunk of funding already comes from the private sector, and they issue bonds to kind of basically they call them infrastructure bonds to finish this project, right? Now we already paid tolls, so if you're traveling on a highway in India, you have to pay the toll. So let that toll income itself support the road building instead of government putting an additional income into building these roads, because ultimately the car owning population is less than 10% in India. Okay, we are building 6-lane highways for that 5 to 10% of population and ignoring the needs of 90% of the population who are still below poverty, right? So all of this infrastructure spending at the end of the day is only benefiting the minority rather than the majority, who form the backbone of India's population, right? Now, similarly, with ports and airports, all of those other things can be built by private sectors, and then a fee collected that can actually help in the project implementation. So the government can have an equity stake, but should not invest any money, any taxpayer money in any of these projects, because the end customer should be the responsible for funding these projects rather than taxpayer. what we believe is that instead of having government spending money, if the end user actually pays via tolls and other fees, the upkeep of the roads actually would be better. If you look at the road quality of the highways versus rural or state or roadways, the quality is significantly different, because wherever the tolls are collected, the quality is much better compared to where the tolls are not collected. It's like the accountability comes from the ground up, right? Now, a lot of people have questions about what would happen, if the welfare keeps growing up, whether welfare keeps growing as a part of budget, right? Now, this is where the magic happens. If you look at India's growth trajectory, a uh, big bang moment was the 1991 liberalization, right? Which was chaired by late Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. Now, Mr. Narasimha Rao ended the license laws, which was crippling India's business climate. Okay. Now, the reason why this was done only in 1991 and not in 71 or previous, a decade prior to that, was because India in the 90s was on the verge of bankruptcy and didn't have enough dollars to import crude oil for more than a month. So we were on the brink of bankruptcy, and IMF stepped in and said, unless you change implement the reforms and then cut the license raj, etc., we're not going to give you those additional loans. The people think Narasimha Rao is some sort of economic genius, but the reality is he was cornered. So he didn't have any option but to implement these free market policies, or rather quasi free market policies. As a result, the economy boomed, and then ever since, the economy has been doing 5 to 8% every year, which is an insane growth compared to the rest of the world. But then we can actually do that magic if the government budget comes under stress. If government is forced to spend 70 to 80% on public welfare rather than this white elephant mega infrastructure products, politicians have an incentive to actually be more business friendly rather than collect bribes and be in a rent-seeking sort of behavior. Now, there is no way we can eradicate corruption unless we clearly give out an incentive to politicians saying, hey, as long as you're delivering on the welfare and looking at you know greater good of the country and improving the business climate and business taxes, you'll be reelected, right? If we can give that assurance, this is not a direct assurance, it's an implicit assurance, right? Only then and only then will we able to change the corruption cycle that we discussed in the beginning. Now, again, just a reminder that we have a long way to go in terms of being a business friendly country, and then in the contract, especially the contract enforcement part. So we have a long way to go in doing that, which means the politicians need to be given an incentive to act in the best interest of the businesses and becoming a business friendly country. Now, the interesting thing is, a lot of people think politicians have it easy. They have it all figured out. They're untouchables. They have all these myths and issues. The reality is, despite playing religion, divisive politics, and spending majorly on infrastructure, a lot of times that doesn't turn out into electoral success. The biggest basically reflection of this is the fact that BJP lost the MP Lok Sabha seat in Ayodhya, despite spending massively, despite coming up with this big Hindutva image, building the Ram Mandir, etc. Still, they lost that core seat of Ayodhya. And the reason is that we think politicians know how people think. The reality is they're basically thinking themselves on placing bets. The reality is they will not be able to get it correctly. The point being, if we can if the politicians know that uh, basically becoming pro business and giving out welfare is the best way for them to re-elected, instead of spending crores of rupees on the election, bribing the voters, they will do that, right? So we need to come away from the pre-election voter bribing to post-election women-focused welfare politics. That's the way we become a corruption-free society and a pro-business country, and then eventually we go on to this virtuous cycle of growth. Uh, Now, the other thing that we need to think of, why only women? Apart from the vote bank, the reality at the end of the day, women spend a bulk of their time, adult time, caring for the family, the elderly, etc., etc. So they are hampered by these physical realities and can't participate in the economically productive work, right? So ultimately, they do need the support of the state so that they can have some amount of economic freedom, and they contribute to the greater success of the society, right? Now, what we believe as a side effect of supporting women and the elderly in a family is that if a family, which is a typical Indian family, has a husband and wife, two kids, and maybe one or two in-laws, right? So if in a typical family structure where there's about five people, if the women and kids and the elderly receive some sort of state benefit, and that amount comes to something like 10 to 15,000, the husband is suddenly free of not being stuck to the same old profession that they've been doing for hundreds of years, like farming or whatnot, right? They can actually explore a new profession, and this social security acts as a cushion for people to explore a new profession and not be just stuck with one thing, and that inevitably leads to a labor and land reform, which are also one of the biggest blockers in India for business friendly climate. So there's lots of side effects that happen once a certain amount of social security is given for Indian families. So what we believe is there are many other things which we'll probably discuss in the next sessions, but these are the few things that we thought which could immediately happen once strong social security is given for the Indian families. With that, I want to conclude this presentation, and uh, yeah, I just want to call out and say let's create a better tomorrow by empowering Indian women economically. Hashtag Nari Shakti. So thanks a lot for joining this presentation, and we'll be sharing this on YouTube. And if you have any other questions, feel free to uh, let us know. Thank you.